listener production.
Hello, welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. Is your social media serving you tradwife, that is traditional wife, content? These creators embrace a traditional existence, which includes being a wife, mother and homemaker, making things like sourdough to bubble gum from scratch and honouring a nuclear family, their husband and God.
We've been missold this before, this like pretty perfect, peaceful homestead life. A number of times this has been packaged up to us and sold, and it's been kind of rubbish and oppressive, and it can be used in a really oppressive way.
So while feminism is the gift that allows women to pick whatever path they want, some are asking if tradwife content is to girls what Andrew Tate is to boys. Helen Smith's chat with The Times' Megan Agnew is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, Katrina Blowers is here with me for the headlines. It is Thursday, August the 1st.
Well, let's begin in Paris, and it has been another golden night for the Aussies, with Jess Fox claiming her second gold at the Games in the canoe slalom.
It's pretty special to know that I've been able to back it up, and definitely felt inspired by Ariane and Kaylee the other night who were dominating in the pool. And, I love our team, and it's so special to be part of this Olympic team and to bring another one of these home for us.
Yeah, good on you, Jess. That audio there, thanks to the Nine Network. We also won a medal in the BMX with Natalia Deem taking out bronze, and another bronze in shooting with Penny Smith from Geelong finishing third in the women's trap final, hitting 32 of 40 targets. The Matildas, though, this morning have lost to the United States 2-1 and now face missing out on the finals. It means they're now relying on Colombia beating or drawing with Canada for their Olympic hopes to remain alive, Sasha.
Also happening this morning, Molly Callahan and Shayna Jack, they missed out in the women's 100-metre freestyle final. They came in 4th and 5th respectively. Sweden's Sarah Hoistrom won the gold in that race. And Katrina, the highly anticipated triathlon, finally ran after swimming in the Seine was cleared by Olympic officials late yesterday. It was a very late approval for this. The women's event was won by French athlete Cassandra Beaugrand, while the men's was won by Britain's Alex Lee. Aussies unfortunately finished outside the medals for this one, but really interesting reading the reports from the athletes who were in the Seine. While the whole issue in the lead-up was about poo and E. coli in the river, what ended up being the big issue for the athletes on the day was the currents. Apparently they were so strong and they were trying to swim against them. One of the Aussies said she nearly drowned and drank 10 litres of water while she was in there. So it sounds like it was just really, really tough.
Yuck, imagine having to swim through that, and you're worried already because there's been so much speculation about it all. But, because it's so choppy, you do end up taking on and drinking that much of the water. Hopefully, she's going to be okay in the next few days. Time will tell, I suppose.
Iran has vowed revenge after 2 senior militant leaders were killed by Israeli strikes in the last 24 hours. Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been confirmed dead after an attack on Wednesday while he was in the Iranian capital of Tehran. It came only hours after Israel said it had killed a top Hezbollah commander in Lebanon. The dual assassinations have sparked fears for the progress of a ceasefire deal. Mediators Qatar and Egypt both say it will set back hopes of putting an end to the fighting in Gaza and bringing Israeli hostages home, Katrina.
Yeah, this is really a major, major development. It is worth noting the Israeli government has officially declined to comment on Haniyeh's death, but the strike was widely acknowledged as an Israeli operation both inside the country and beyond. Israel, of course, vowed to kill all Hamas leaders after the October 7 attacks, and its intelligence services have a history of carrying out covert killings inside Iran. We may never know the full story behind this, but the US now is obviously trying to, quote, take the temperature down in order to avoid a wider conflict in the Middle East, which many analysts are saying is a big possibility now. And that, of course, is the last thing we need for that to flow over in the region. There's some troubling new data out today, closer to home, showing threats to Australia's politicians have almost doubled in just 2 years. This is a worrying trend, and Australian Federal Police have confirmed a record number of complaints were made by our elected officials in the last financial year, more than 1,000. That's compared to 555 threats in 21-22 and 709 in 22-23. Now, Sasha, a review is underway on whether more elected officials need the kind of dignitary protection that's normally afforded just to either the Prime Minister, or in the States it's usually just the Premier. Interestingly, during election campaigns, the opposition leader normally gets that dignitary protection too, so they get that team of, Secret Service style police officers following them around, but normally they don't. So this review's looking at whether the opposition leader might need it all the time, and whether people like the Governor-General might need it too. So this has all come particularly after the fallout from the Israel-Hamas war and last year's voice referendum. I think it's really troubling that this is happening, whether it's, keyboard warriors or not.
Yeah, 100%. And we just saw an attempted assassination on the US president. And while that is overseas, I think it speaks to the rhetoric around how we talk about not only our elected officials, but people that we don't even know, people who are public figures. It seems that, and Anthony Albanese made this point, that rhetoric does matter. If we're being hateful and we're spewing really awful negative things in public forums, whether it's the internet or whether it's, with friends at a barbecue or whatever, it breeds itself in this hate and contempt. And we don't want to see that happen in Australia, where things are so hateful and high stakes, I suppose, that we see, it's already happening. We're seeing this increase in threats. So it'll be interesting to see the results of that review and whether they find that our pollies do need more protection. And a landmark Australian study has found improving diet and exercise is just as effective as therapy for sufferers of mild to moderate depression. Deakin University's Food and Mood Centre carried out the research during the peak of the pandemic, offering participants either cognitive behavioural therapy or access to diet and exercise advice and resources. Now, at the end of the study, 42% of those who had worn Fitbits, started eating a Mediterranean diet and were encouraged to move every day reported an improvement in their condition. 37% of participants who worked with a psychologist reported feeling better as well. Now, this was the first time, Katrina, that researchers had looked at diet and exercise as a treatment and not just an add-on to therapy. It was a small group. It was 182 people. So the view in the medical and the professional field is that more research needs to be done, but interesting preliminary results.
I have so many questions about this, because they were saying, it's a small group and it was mostly female skewed and they ate this altered Mediterranean diet, and caveat, you shouldn't just think that by eating better and exercising that you might not need therapy on top of that. But I've got questions around, what were these people doing beforehand? What were they eating? How much were they exercising? Because if you are someone who has a good diet and you're not like a couch potato, would that potentially impact you as well? Or do you have to come off a really low base? So I'm encouraged by this. I think that there's definitely a lot of merit to it, but it again puts the onus back on you and what are you doing wrong in your life. Sometimes, like for whatever reason, you definitely do need to go and see a psychologist. And it also, it does nothing to help the stigma that comes with still, unfortunately, taking various medications like, antipsychotic drugs if you need to.
No, you're 100% right. And I think that's the concern with a study like this, is that people, it's like, oh, it's your fault. Just go do some exercise and eat fish. But it's never that simple. I think maybe it points to the idea that, there are a wide range of treatments we should be looking at and considering to improve people's mental health. And hopefully this helps, on that journey to bettering our mental health, because, we know it's definitely not where it needs to be. Katrina, thank you so much for being here for the headlines. Next up, it's our deep dive into tradwives and whether they're dangerous.
Hi, Helen Smith joining you for this episode of The Briefing. Is your TikTok serving you tradwife or traditional wife content? These creators embrace a traditional existence of being a wife, mother and homemaker, making everything from scratch, from sourdough to bubblegum. Some big names you might have seen or heard of include Nara Smith, Estee and Ballerina Farm, aka Hannah Neeleman.
First, we're adding the citric acid. Then we heat the milk up to 95 degrees and add the animal rennet. Very handy and important in cheese making is a thermometer.
But while most might view a video of a tradwife making cheese from scratch in a scenic setting as an innocent escape from our daily life, others are calling out the tradwife movement as potentially glamourising power imbalances of traditional gender roles. Megan Agnew is a senior features writer from The Times who recently visited one of the most iconic tradwives, Ballerina Farm, with her article giving us an insight into what it's really like to live this life. Megan, thanks for joining us on The Briefing. The idea of a traditional wife is nothing new, so what's the fascination with modern-day tradwives?
So in the last 2 years, the old tradwives have essentially gone online. So they are living what used to be this really private, domestic, devoted maternal existence really publicly online. And they're doing it because it looks really pretty. It's sort of quite soothing to watch often. And it's really, really popular.
So what then makes someone a tradwife?
Well, it's funny because Hannah Neeleman, who I interviewed, who otherwise is known as Ballerina Farm, doesn't actually define herself as a tradwife, but other people do. And I think really what it is a group of women who promote returning to really traditional gender roles within the household.
So why have tradwives become such a debate of conversation and almost controversial?
Well, I think in America, it's really, really placed within a wider landscape of politics. So there's a real curtailing, obviously, over the last few years of women's reproductive freedoms. And there's also a really strong narrative, particularly from the Republican Party in this election, of traditional American family values, which is husband, wife, children, husband generally work. Otherwise, more sort of, I say historically, I mean in the last decade, it's placed within this real lurch forward among women and mothers and women who don't choose to be mothers around how we talk about it. I.e., we're now much more happy to say and feel more comfortable and are allowed to say that some bits of motherhood are not as rewarding as everyone used to say they were, or more of a struggle. And it also comes alongside real emphasis on women in the workplace, i.e. outside of the home. And that's been a tough battle to fight and is still being fought. And so I think there's a real fear that this emphasis on the peaceful looking tradwife setup might in some way threaten women's ability to choose otherwise.
So you did mention just before you visited Ballerina Farm, aka Hannah Neeleman. What was your first impressions of Hannah and the farm?
Hannah was so sweet and lovely and kind and tiny and gorgeous. And she kind of spoke like a Kardashian almost. She reminded me of like a little Kardashian, but out in like these Western wilds. It was kind of funny. She was much quieter than I thought she was going to be. And she was much more reserved on the big flash topics which have surrounded her over the last couple of years, which actually did surprise me a bit. And it sort of made me realise that other people politicise her and she's not necessarily involved in pushing back on that. Like I did ask her about it and she doesn't really engage in it that much. She says, this is the life that I've chosen and that's kind of that. It's not that much more complicated to her. Her husband was more engaged in leading the way when it came to, we spoke about abortion and we spoke about gay marriage and we spoke about divorce and those sort of things. And he was more engaged on those topics than she was. He did lead the way on those.
Your article and your story has kind of gone viral across TikTok and socials. What have people been saying in response to the story?
it's been like 50-50. If you want to scroll through my DMs right now, it's like one extreme or the other. There is no in between. So one side, I've got actually an enormous response from a lot of Mormon women, which I found really touching. And I was so moved to receive a lot of them saying, this felt like a really true representation of the power imbalance and the gender roles within a Mormon marriage. Thank you so much. Other women saying similar who weren't Mormons, that it was an important way of looking at marriage and roles within the household. And then the other side of it has been people saying that as a childless, unmarried woman, I don't have the right to judge her and that I was overly judgmental of her, which I'm a journalist and it's my job to go in and ask questions and then put those answers in quotes and what I saw. There was no story written before I arrived. Of course there wasn't. And to suggest that certain people can't write certain stories is ridiculous. And I've never had that with anything else that I've written. I've written on a huge range of honestly, the most random things you can possibly think of. And no one's ever turned around and said, you're not allowed to write about this. So I thought that was an interesting response. But it was mainly from women, almost entirely from women.
Yeah, you just mentioned there the religion kind of aspect. How does religion play into the tradwife life?
Well, Daniel and Hannah said that every decision that they made is related to God and their faith. They believe that they are on God's mission, promoting family life online and promoting small farming online and natural agriculture. And their roles within how many children they have, they ask God whether there's another child to come down and then they have another child. It is so intimately intertwined with who they are and how they live, which actually hadn't come out online so much. I was quite surprised actually by that. And they have the same views as their church on abortion, which is, in the instance of rape and incest, yes, but otherwise not. And, she dresses modestly, they don't drink, etc. And in the rest of tradwife culture, it's implicit, but it's not explicit, which is really interesting. It's like for most of them, they don't talk about their specific political, religious views, but it is implicit in the life that they're choosing and they hold those values core.
I want to jump also to the idea of gender norms. When I think of these kind of gender norms being like pushed or encouraged or something online to the extreme, my mind goes to like Andrew Tate and Harrison Bucker pushing these extreme gender norms in this social media kind of landscape. Are tradwives doing the same thing in a more palatable, pretty way?
That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it like that. I think it's certainly influential and it certainly creeps into your social media feed, particularly as young women. And we've been missold this before, this like pretty, perfect, peaceful homestead life. A number of times this has been packaged up to us and sold, and it's been kind of rubbish and oppressive, and it can be used in a really oppressive way. It's a tool that is bad for women in some instances. The difference is that now we're sort of post-choice feminism. Women who choose to live that life are in some way making a free decision, and there should be no judgment, but also we should be allowed analysis, I think, on why this is becoming mainstream and why this is becoming platformed.
Why are people so invested in tradwives and kind of getting upset with the idea of it? Is this going to be just a trend, or will this tradwife movement continue to grow?
I know, it's really funny. It's like some people enjoy being angry at it. It's like an outlet maybe for their anger, or they seek them out. I think the feeling for a lot of women is like, really? Like, as if? Like, are you sure? Like, have we actually, like, is this working? How's it working? I thought everyone said this didn't work. I thought everyone said that this wasn't happy, or that it was much tougher than it looked and now it looks really easy. it's like, whoa. And, you know, people like Nara Smith, who really takes it to another extreme, who's another tradwife who like makes homemade chewing gum. And she kind of looks like a caricature. And people are like, what? I think that's a lot of it. And then the other part is that it just looks really good. Like, it looks amazing when you're on the subway or the tube or the train home and you work in some dirty metropolis and you've been in your like hermetically sealed office all day. And then you're like scrolling through your phone and you see these like muddy children riding like Mustangs through the American West. And you're like, oh, like that looks amazing. Like, I want to be there. I want to be under that sky. And I want my children to get off their iPads and like run through the meadow with them. So I think that there's like this escapism too, that people like, it's kind of like fetishistic almost. It's like the thing that's not allowed, but it kind of looks amazing as well.
So to wrap it up, do you think that tradwives online are dangerous?
I don't think that they are the problem specifically. I think that they exist in a wider culture, which is at a policy level led by men pressurizing women into living a life at home. I really, really don't want to like specifically target specific women for bringing other women down, because as Hannah said to me, this is the life that she's chosen and that's it. That it's really that simple for her. She's not going out to like poke the bear. She really isn't. That's just her life. But yeah, I mean, I think it can be really pressurizing. And the thing that I am more worried about is the wider culture that's sort of allowing and enabling it to exist in the first place.
Megan, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was Megan Agnew, senior features writer at The Times. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. But before you go, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it as well. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search for Listener Newsroom. And we'll be back in your feed with another ep this afternoon. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.